On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to GLF's Brave New World. The series has allowed us to access the private lives of our many authors as they speak on their work, their environment, their process of writing, and share with us the secrets of what keeps them going. We presented conversations with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Piku Iyer, Elizabeth Gilbert, Gloria Steinem, George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, Oran Pamuk, Jhumpa Lahiri, Peter Carey, Stephen Greenblatt, and so many others. And across our platform, we've reached over 4 million views and 29 million impressions. Today's session is presented in partnership with the delegation of the European Union to India, the European Union Prize for Literature, Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe. Our magazine partner for the series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our first session of the day is Strange Flowers, Donal Ryan in conversation with Cauvery Madhavan. Irish author Donal Ryan explores the muses, methods, and inspiration behind his latest work, Strange Flowers, a story that paints the beautiful and devastating life of despairing parents, their missing daughter, and what or who she brings back with her astonishing return. It is an intricate depiction of loss, alienation, and the redemptive power of love, reaffirming Ryan as one of the most talented and empathetic writers in the modern literary world. Donal Ryan is the author of 5 best-selling novels and a short story collection. He has won several awards for his fiction, including the European Union Prize for Literature for Spinning Heart, and has twice been nominated for the Booker Prize. He teaches creative writing at the University of Limerick. Cauvery Madhavan was born in India and moved to Ireland 33 years ago. Her latest book, The Tainted, has been published to much critical acclaim. She's currently working on her 4th novel. As you all are aware, all our sessions are available to view on our Facebook page, GLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest GLF. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest GLF. In case we drop off, just hang in there. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Strange Flowers, Donal Ryan in conversation with Cauvery Madhavan. Over to you, Cauvery.
Thank you, Sanjay. Hello, Donal, and hello, everyone around the world. You are all so welcome to this edition of Brave New World, brought to you by the Jaipur Litfest. We are live here from Ireland. Donal is in Limerick, and I am in Glengariff in West Cork. It's such a privilege, Donal, to be able to chat with you about Strange Flowers. I've just finished a second read, and it was such a joy, to linger over the beautiful, absolutely beautiful, evocative prose that immediately places you into the very heart and soul of rural Ireland. Before I ask you all the things I'm dying to ask you, Donal, could you just set the scene and tell us a little bit about Strange Flowers, who it's about and what it's about?
Thank you so much, Cauvery, and thanks so much, Sanjay, for that introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be talking to you guys. Strange Flowers is a book set very much in my home place, really, as kind of almost all my fiction is, but it's a book that's very personal to me because I guess it's a book about loss and familial love and fatherhood and motherhood. And I wrote the first draft in kind of very quickly in kind of a bit of a fog of grief after my father's sudden death 3 years ago. And the reason I say the book is personal is because I really feel like, gratitude towards it because it softened, the hard landing I was having at the time. And kind of, it was a way of almost pushing away the first terrible shock of grief. And, I know we all have to lose our parents. It's almost unavoidable, but, it's a hard thing to face. And so I was glad to be able to kind of transmute the grief a little bit into the book. But the book itself, really, there's a character in the book called Joshua Elmwood, who kind of is me, to be honest. And that's why the book opens in the mid-70s, because I was born in 1976 in the village that's described pretty much in the book. And so I wanted Josh to be the same age in the 90s as I was in the 90s, because the 90s was such a kind of tumultuous time, and a time of such intense social change, and a time of really opening up in the world. And it was also my time of kind of coming of age. So it was a very important part of my life. And I hadn't really ever set anything in the 90s before. And so the first draft of the book was far longer and more involved. And it was kind of a crazy story set in the 90s, in the middle of the book that had to go, because it really was just, it was me being very indulgent. It wouldn't have made much sense to anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I sometimes, I actually, I read the book second time around slowly and, lingered over the prose, as I said.
That's lovely to hear.
But when I finished it, I thought, my God, this book is like a manual for fathers, just to show, the good that comes out of being kind to your children and being compassionate to your children. So just coming back to, what you were saying about, the book being, one of the themes of the book is familial love. And and it the book deals with family and grief and community as well, race. But do you think everyone's story in the end is about family? Because I mean, are we creatures of our families in the end? I just feel a commonality between Ireland and India, and perhaps other cultures as well, is this notion that you don't want to make a holy show of yourself, and I think all the unhappiness that we live with stems out of that one thing: don't make a holy show of yourself. And in India we have a phrase in Hindi that kind of that is log kya kahenge, and that means what would people say. And do you think that is the root of all our unhappiness, Donal?
Oh God, I think it's a lot of it, to be honest, Cauvery. I really do believe that. And I was laughing when you first said a holy show, because it does sound funny, but it's so true. I mean, everything that we do, and everything we think, initially comes through a prism of family and what has been inculcated in us and engendered in us. And I mean, I was so lucky to have been just swathed in kindness and love as a child, and so many people weren't. And so my view of the world was affected by that. But still, there are certain things I wouldn't ever say or do, because I know I have the feeling I'd be letting my parents down, or my grandparents even.
Yes.
And I say it tongue in cheek, but I often read in public, and I often edit what I'm reading, because I literally can feel my grandmother's ghostly breath on my face, and I can hear her saying, "Don't make a show of us now. Don't make a show of us." And I mean, again, that's just kind of making fun of it, but it is a really serious and terribly tragic thing for lots of people, because it's so hard sometimes for people to be who they really are, because of the awful fear of first of all disappointing your parents or your family, and secondly, for a lot of people, there are terminal ramifications for letting your family down. Yeah, it's a tragedy, and it shapes that idea shaped our society for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in India, it's this exact same, and it still continues, and causes so much of heartache between families and, between siblings as well. Just moving on, Donal, I mean, for me as a reader, it was, and I know you've spoken about this, and you've written very hilariously as well about your accent and your need to write in your own, colloquial vernacular voice. And for me as a reader, it was that colloquial voice that, so quickly eased me into the book and into the setting and into the characters and their lives. And, very much like in India and in Ireland, I think readers all over the world will understand the notion of a language being very local, and how, idioms and the manner of speaking, slang, intonations, that can change in Ireland from townland to townland. But the whole idea that, one word with just an inflection or a twitch of a head, or, a lifting of a chin, could mean 100 different things.
Yes,
for example, the word grand. I mean, when I came to Ireland, if somebody asked me, will you have a cup of coffee, to know that the way you said grand would define whether you were saying yes, no, maybe,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
yes, you pay for it, no, I'll buy it, just by that one word. So, when it comes to your advice to, to up and coming writers, to novice writers, how does one go about, making sure that your voice is authentic, and what advice would you give to young writers about getting speech patterns right and speaking, in an authentic voice, and how important is it?
It can be very tricky, and that's very funny that you say that about the word grand, because it's so hard to actually to write the infinite nuance of grand.
Yeah.
It's so hard to articulate that in writing. Because in a way, like, the written word is so limited, isn't it? Even though it's our raw material and it's our art, it's what we do for a living. I mean, the written word, you can never really get to the very core of something.
Yeah.
You can always try and push towards the truth, but I mean, just that example, and it's such a gloriously excellent and funny example. Just grand can mean so many different things. It can mean I'm terrible, I'm about to die, or it can mean I'm over the moon, I'm in the best mood possible. It's just pretty, depending on how you say it and exactly how your face looks as you say it, and whether you look up or down. It's brilliant. But when it comes to dramatic language, it's what allowed me to be a writer, to be honest, because I spent 10 years of my life working in a job that I liked, but a pretty kind of boring data entry job, and with people who I really liked, and I really enjoyed my work, but I had loads of time in my life to write. I lived alone in an apartment, and I had various, girlfriends and flatmates over the 10 years, but most of the time, I was a young guy who had, a nice job and loads of free time, and I tried my best to be a writer. And for some reason, and I don't know why, I always tried to write in kind of a heightened, slightly upper class English voice. I don't know why. I mean, I'm an Irish Catholic Republican, and I have very dear friends who are English, of course. But it seemed to me to be the correct voice to try to write in. I don't know why. And until I struck upon the very obvious expedient of writing in my own voice, I wasn't able to write in a way that felt natural. And so I started to write in a North Tipperary accent, basically, in the dramatic vernacular of my own people, of people I love, and it just made it seem so natural and so right, and it allowed me to flow as a writer for the first time. And for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of what I'd written, because for years I would burn things, I'd tear things up and burn them so they wouldn't exist, because I felt such terrible shame, because it just all felt so wrong. And I guess when it comes to writing a dramatic voice, I mean, you don't have to. It's not the be all and end all, but it does make a character really real. It makes a narrative voice very real if it has its own peculiar dramatic that rings true. And it's just a matter of listening, I think. And it's a matter of reading widely and being open to otherness, and being open to other people's ways of expressing themselves. Because, there's such a multitudinous array of voices now anywhere you go. Because Ireland, thank God, is multi-ethnic now, and we have this vast array of experience and voices to mine and to listen to, and it's great. It's a great thing, and so you do need to be a close listener, I think, and a close watcher of people, and that can sound creepy as well. You're kind of creeping around as writers, listen to people, and it's slinking away, but not like that. But you know what I mean. You have to really
absolutely, Yeah, I have to say now, I judge a person's complete integration into Ireland by their ability to understand the nuances of grand.
Yeah, brilliant. I will. I mean, if an American person says to you, "Will you give me a lift to Dublin tomorrow?" and if you say, "I will," that person will come to your door the next day going, "Hi, Donal." Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, I mean, every country and every language, has that. And, India being so vast with so many different languages, even between North and South, East and West, there are so many mishaps, language mishaps because of nuances being so subtle. Just moving on to another subject, I know Strange Flowers, touches on so many themes. There's belonging to a family, to a community, to a race, and I just love the idea that sport brings these things together. because your one of your central characters, Alexander, comes to Ireland. He's a black man. I'm not giving the story away now. He's a black man, comes to Ireland, and he gets involved in the sport of hurling. And that's what makes him, that's what makes the community accept him, and helps him to integrate to a certain extent. And I just I think it's wonderful that today in Ireland the exact same thing is happening. With the new Irish, and all the immigrants coming into Ireland, playing GAA, and on the athletics, excelling in athletics, and running for Ireland, on football pitches and cricket pitches. I mean, my mother, she lives with me. She is 82 years old, and you should see her when Ireland is playing cricket. I mean, she just totally goes green, like totally. So, I think it's wonderful that the new Irish from all over the world are finding their foothold in Ireland through sport. And it's wonderful that you brought that out in the book. And do you think that, sport gives people hope? And what, do you have any opinions on that at all?
Absolutely, totally, and thank God for sport. And sometimes, I mean, there are times now and again when I resent sport because it takes over people's lives so much, and sometimes it seems to be the only entertainment people want. So everything else gets pushed aside sometimes, but maybe rightly so, because it can be so pure and so full of joy that brings such hope, and just that thing of people coming together in sport and being Irish because they're part of a team that's an Irish team. It's a lovely thing. And I remember seeing a documentary recently about a young lad whose parents were Syrian, and he still hadn't been given an Irish passport after all these years. A young lad was an All-Ireland medal for football. Can you imagine that? But like the idea of my character Alexander coming to North Tipperary, I was thinking to myself, okay, if this guy comes from London and he's married to an Irish girl and he's living in this village, where the sport of hurling is in people's blood, it's in the cells of their body, there is going to be a benign prejudice where people are going to go, oh, he'd be a great hurler, because he's a big, tall, he's fast, he's going to be a good hurler. And I say prejudice, but not really in a bad way. They're going to prejudge him on his appearance, basically, and say he's good at hurling because of this, who he is. And so I think it's inevitable that he would have ended up at least trying to play hurling. And I really wanted him to be a hurler, to be honest. Because I wanted him to be I wanted him to be loved because he's a very lovable character. And maybe it's unfortunate, but it would have been the quickest route to people's hearts at the time in that place, would have been to be part of the local hurling team. And there's a family there were Sean O'Gahilpeen was one of our greatest hurlers of all time, and his mum was Fijian and his dad was from Leitrim, and they lived in Cork. I mean, I remember hearing Sean Og and his brothers talking about first arriving in Cork with their parents and people looking at them and staring at them and feeling very out of place. And as soon as they started to play hurling, that was it. They were part of the community, and there was no question about it. And in a way, I suppose it's sad they had to play hurling to be accepted. But I'm sure, because they're lovely lads, they would have been loved anyway. But it was just a very quick route into acceptance.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting that you say that, because my own children, played hurling, and my son would have hurled, and both my daughters played camogie. And for them, it wasn't a case of integration because they were born here. They don't think of themselves in any other way other than Irish.
Of course.
Them playing hurling, them playing camogie helped me integrate, because as I stood on the sidelines and as I was driving them from various matches, standing by the side of the pitch talking to the other mothers, and getting to know people that way, ending up being on the wash rota for the jerseys. So all that kind of really helps you. Your children playing the local sport really helps. So I just love the fact that you brought that into the book. I really, really very much loved it. I have the completely different question now. Again, back the book, and how Josh, one of your characters, Josh, again the central character towards the end of the book, he writes an alternative gospel story, and I know I've heard you say that you have quite a strong faith, and I'm just wondering. I'm curious about the gospel story that he wrote and what you were trying to say, because the backstory of his gospel story and the aftermath of the gospel story that he writes is so subversive. like you're almost kind of implying that, miracles were like a showmanship, and you need to be careful what you wish for. So I was just wondering, like, were you trying to say something in that?
Well, I got the idea for that story, for that kind of inversion or that kind of rewriting of the story of the blind man in the Gospel of Mark at Mass once when
Yes.
that Gospel was read out. And on the way home in the car with my dad, it's not that long ago, it was shortly before my father died, and we started to talk about it. And I said to Dad, I wonder what really happened, if Jesus and his followers came to this village and cured this man of blindness.
Yeah.
Imagine how it would have been for that man afterwards. Imagine the questions he would have faced, and would people have accused him of it all being a trick, because I remember when a very prominent Irish bishop retired, he dropped this bombshell where he said, I'm not convinced of the divinity of Christ.
Oh my
God. I
God.
thought that was a very brave thing to say,
Yeah.
Because I'm not convinced myself, because I've read several historical accounts of Jesus Christ and the Gospels and that time, and maybe Christ's divinity was a construct of the early church, but I do believe he was a great man, and I do believe he was saying that I'm God in as far as we're all God, we're all part of the same universe, we're all part of the same godly existence. But I really wanted to have that story in the book because I wrote that story kind of for my dad in his memory, because I based it on the conversation we had that day. And at the end of the story, I know I'm not giving too much away, a boy is saved by his father. And I've always had that idea because my father was composed almost completely of kindness. He was incapable of harming another human.
Fabulous.
He was terrible in his life. He was very badly wronged. It's a long story, but he was incapable of even defending himself because he was just so gentle and so peace loving and so kind. And so I wanted there to be a moment where a boy is saved by his father, because I know myself. I remember once I was driving through England. I was being driven. I was going to a festival, and we were driving through a very rural part of southern England. And I thought to myself, this landscape here now would be very alien to my dad, because he's an Irishman. He didn't spend much time in England ever in his life. He wouldn't know the rain. But I thought to myself, if I got out of this car right now and went to a pub and went in a bender for about a week and ended up lying in a ditch somewhere in this alien landscape in southern England, my father would be the one who would come and find me, and he'd pick me up in his arms. I knew that for a fact, and I just knew that with every fiber of my being. And even though he's gone now, I still believe that. I still believe that his presence is there around me all the time. And I wanted that to be part of the book. And so I know it might seem almost plugged in somehow, but for me, it seemed completely right, And that's there's a kind of almost a selfishness sometimes about creating something where you create it, first of all, for yourself, and it has to feel right for you. And it mightn't necessarily feel right for your reader. Because I do believe we must fix a part of our focus firmly on our reader and on our potential audience, because there has to be generosity about art. There has to be a feeling of giving something to the world, and of people being somehow moved or nourished, or in some way, their life to be in some way made better by the act of reading what you've written. But sometimes it can be, sometimes the actual creation of it can be just for you, and I think that part of the book was it was kind of just for me, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually thought there was a parable in your rewriting of the parable, like be careful what you wish for. Really, I just thought it was wonderful. Yeah.
That's very. I mean, that's the thing, because that's so true. Because sometimes the thing that you want most in life, that you struggle for, when you get it, it can be poisoned and tainted. And just the wrong thing for you. And I see it all the time with people who desperately want to achieve certain things. And then it happens, and their life suddenly is just empty and hollow, and doesn't work out sometimes.
Yeah. But I mean, the whole book, as I said at the start of this chat that we're having, that I think every father should have a copy. Every young father or father to be should have a copy of your book, because really, it's such a lesson, of what kindness can achieve, for your children. You being kind, what it can achieve for what you pass on to the children. So again, moving on, Donal, what are you working on at the moment? And do you mull over a story idea for a while before you start? And I mean, what is your process? Do you work out the entire plot, or do you just let your characters tell the story? Would you be able to tell us something about that?
It seems, it feels different for every book, actually. And I'm sure you know yourself. I mean, you've been through the exact same process as me several times, written books. But for me, I always think I've got the whole thing worked out. And, I go running and cycling and swimming. And always, while I'm doing those things, I'm thinking about the book that I'm writing and how it should go, who's going to be in it, what's going to happen. And I always sit down to write the first draft thinking, this is going to be so easy because I know exactly what's going to happen. And then something invades my mind or my creative space and things go terribly wrong very quickly.
They all come to life and have their own minds.
Oh, it's unbelievable. It's incredible. I mean, it sounds a bit supernatural to say that characters absolutely come to life and they start to become willful and disobedient, and they start to become rebellious and just say to you, no, I'm not doing that, I'm doing this. And sometimes it seems as though you have no choice.
And in Strange Flowers, was there somebody who wasn't meant to be sort of big in the book who just pushed their way through to the front?
Actually, I mean, to my shame, Alexander, who is a very central character and who I love, actually. I remember after the first draft went into my editor, he said, Donal Alexander is a great character. You really need to give him more space in the book, And I was kind of a bit wary of it, because of my own mental state at the time. And then I took Brian's advice completely, and I gave Alexander much more space, and I gave him a much more rounded kind of presence in the book. I'm very glad that I did. And also, I mean, I've said this before about this book. There was actually almost a separate novella at the book centre, where I just went off on this mad tangent, and it had to go, really. But it still exists, it might resurface at some stage. But the thing is, though, for once, all the things that I wanted to happen happened in the book. And, the characters and the events haven't changed very much from draft to draft, but the actual form of the book has changed all right. But, definitely, I mean, you can get very lost. And sometimes it's great to get lost in the book, Like the great Mike McCormack said, the novel offers the writer wonderful accommodation. You can go terribly wrong, and the novel will be accommodating and yielding and soft. And let you go wrong, and you can find yourself again. Whereas with short stories and poetry, they're much more unforgiving and cold. There are snipers waiting at every mound.
I mean, that's why they're so difficult to write. I mean, I'd rather write a novel than a short story. So the next thing I know there's a few audience questions coming up, but just before that, Donal, I heard you mention that in one of your interviews, I picked that up so fast because I absolutely love the character, that you might revive Kit in another book. Your character Kit from Strange Flowers, that you might revive her or bring her back in another book, and I can't wait now to read more about her, because I had so much of sympathy for her, and as much as her husband Paddy, the main character is so lovable, and your heart goes out to him, but your heart does go out to her as well, and with her faith and her belief, and her quiet faith is what I would. So I can't wait to see her back in another book. I
love Kit. I really love Kit, actually. And it does seem to me, I think it's almost unfair how much attention Paddy gets. Actually, I feel sorry for Kit as well, because she's kind of getting pushed away. God, Paddy's lovely. Kit's nice too, but she's a bit hard. She's got a kind of a cutting tongue. She's not as sympathetic as Paddy, it seems. But I mean, I based Kit very closely on my mum and my grandmother. Who are very faithful and prayerful women, who are extremely funny. And my grandmother she literally was saying, she'd make the stones laugh. And it's also part of my paternal grandmother, who I never met in Kit, and who I only heard about. But people speak about her with such love and such reverence sometimes. And so she's definitely a composite character with all those women, those powerful, loving women in my life. Composed Kit. And
so definitely we have. Yeah, sorry, Donal, I don't mean to interrupt, but we do have a few questions. So there's Nilanjana wants to ask you, what made you shift from law to being a full-time writer? And she also wants to know, are there words of wisdom you'd like to give upcoming writers who are struggling to take that first step?
Sure.
The full step, rather.
Okay. Well, I never practiced law, actually. After I did my law degree, I worked as a labour inspector, and then, I started to write. And I did law because I really wanted to make money. And then I quickly realized that I wasn't that interested in money. It's just, it's kind of easy come, easy go sometimes. But I always, deep in my heart, I only ever wanted to be a writer. It's the only thing I ever saw myself as being. I mean, I had various ambitions as a child of being a boxer and a footballer and a pilot and all these things. But it's always a whisper in my ear saying, "You're a writer. You're a writer. That's what you are. It's what you should do."
Yeah.
And so thank God.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so grateful to the universe and to the people around me that encouraged me and the people who gave me the confidence to do it, that I became a writer.
Yeah, I think a writer will always out.
So yeah, for sure.
So we have a question from Anil, and he wants to know, are there any books that you would like to suggest to the audience that you have read during the lockdown period?
Yes, actually, I have some right here because
and sorry, Donal, just along with that, a kind of a secondary question that asked by Rohita.
Oh, yes.
Could you please recommend some of your favorite European novel for Indian writers, Indian readers?
Sure. Well, I've just been reading a lot of Michel Houellebecq. Actually, he's a French novelist who's really good. Michel Houellebecq, and he's subversive, and he's bold and challenging, and he's very thought provoking. But I did Ricochet's shelf analysis the other night, and I had some books. So I have these books at hand. So I recommend this book by Darren Nigriafa, A Ghost in the Tree. It's just so beautiful. This guy, he's from County Kilkenny, but he lives in South America. And this book, How to Be Nowhere by Tim McGowan, is really, it's just excellent. And look at that cover, it's just so beautiful. Emma Donoghue is amazing. Emma Donoghue's book Room was one of my favorite books of all time because it's just, you just cannot put it down. And same with this, she writes these books that you just can't put down. This book, As You Were, by Elaine Feeney, is fantastic.
Oh yeah,
heartbreaking and really funny. And just so now, and there's dramatic voices in this that are just done so perfectly well. It's amazing. I always recommend my friend Martin Dyer, and he's an Irish poet, Martin Dyer, and this is his collection, Maiden Names. It's just the most sublime collection of poetry. And everyone knows that we're a nation of poets. Mary O'Malley is another great poet.
She's
got several fantastic collections.
Well, that's a great selection. That's a great selection of recommendations, Donal. We have another question.
I know you're embarrassed, Cauvery, but can I just recommend Cauvery's book, The Tainted, as well?
Thank you.
And actually, I must say, I read an article about your writing of the book, and I remember reading about your method of research and of traveling over and back to India to research it, and your research was so forensic and assiduous for the book, and that's why the book, I think, is so highly acclaimed. It's so important, and I mean, I've accused myself of laziness as a researcher, but I force myself to do it,
Yeah, Donal, actually talking about research, there's a question from Ria, and she wants to know what is the kind of research you do before you write a novel, and is the final version similar to what you started off with?
Sometimes it happens that way. I mean, with my first published novel, The Spinning Heart, the published book was very, very close to the first draft. Actually, it's a short book, so I wrote very quickly. And the same with the thing about December, but with other books, it's a bit different. I wrote a book called All We Shall Know, and the book charts a pregnancy, and so I had to be and my wife had 2 babies at this stage, so I should have been able to do it, no problem. But it just seemed as though all of her experience was just wiped from my memory when I sat down to write. I kept going, Emery, it was like around the 4th month. How did it feel? And she was going, I can't remember either, actually. I actually had to go and read books about pregnancy, to write that book. Which is terrible. But I wrote a novel called From a Low and Quiet Sea with a Syrian character, and I'd spent 7 years working on an almost weekly basis with people from Syria and part of the world, and so I was fairly happy that I had the voice and the experience kind of right. But still, there's no way to know if you're getting it right, because you're trying to be somebody else, so it's so hard to write somebody else. All you can do is your absolute best to make sure it's right, or somewhere right and authentic.
We have a very interesting question from Elaine Canning, and she says, thank you, Donal, for such a fascinating insight into your book, which she's just about to start reading, apparently. And she says she's intrigued by the title Strange Flowers. And she also says, are you able to say a little bit about the significance of the name without giving too much away?
Okay, sure. Well, it's because there's a mixed race couple in the book, and they have a child whose colouring is unexpected, basically. And so that's kind of where the strange flowers comes from. And also it's because one of the characters, Alexander, is a gardener, and he creates a beautiful garden with flowers that wouldn't be native to the place where the garden is. And so it kind of has a few different kind of insinuations in the book. And also because my own father was a really keen gardener, and he'd plant things that nobody really heard of. And he had a close friend who was a horticulturalist, who was a very kind of lovely man, but very serious about horticulture and about flowers. And I remember my dad, being always being lighthearted and full of joy, but having very, very intense conversations with his friend about flowers and trees and how they should be planted and where and how they should grow. It was just a lovely thing. And so it's really, that's really it, I suppose. There are kind of several different strands to the title.
Yeah. Well, you're going to love the book now. You're going to love the book, having just started it. I have two questions that are kind of quite similar. One is from Harry, and he says, have you weaved your own life experiences into your writing? And then Madhav asked something, fairly connected. He wants to know, was it difficult to research for writing family relations?
Yeah. No, I really do. I mean, maybe it's part of, of the kind of the way I became a writer in the end, or how I became, confident as a writer, because I decided to write from within and to start within myself. I mean, it's so important, as Colin McKenna always says, it's so important to reach outwards, to look outwards, but to start within yourself, it's a great place to start. And so definitely I draw on my own experience, my own emotions, my own way of seeing the world, and I steal from my family and my friends all the time. I remember hearing Come to Bean say this, and I remember hearing Christine Dyer, a hero of mine, say this as well, that you can't be afraid. You have to use your family's experience. You have to steal and plunder, and don't feel any compunction. Don't feel any guilt about it. Just do it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, because sometimes I feel, oh my God, I have to wait for somebody to die before I can tell that story. So it's a terrible thing to say, but and I think you're sort of wrapped up in the thing of, as we were talking about earlier, not wanting to make a show of family, Yeah. So what are you reading yourself now at the moment, Donal? What are you reading at the moment?
I started this weeks ago. John Bynes' fabulous book, A Traveller at the Gates of Wisdom, and it's set over 2,000 years, and each story is, I think, 445 years separated. It's the same group of souls telling a story that continues throughout the world and throughout 2,000 years of history. And I'm only up to 1916 at the moment, because I'm reading it every night before I sleep. Because we've had kind of a stressful month at home with a few kind of disasters, and it's just been this balm. It's just been this lovely, this incredible story every night. Because John Byne is actually, he's just a master storyteller, and he seems like one of these writers who can do whatever he wants in fiction. He can decide to write any kind of book and do it with verve and aplomb over and over again. It's amazing.
So I'm actually going to stop you there, and here is a fabulous writer and a fabulous book. We're out of time, Donal. I've just been told we're out of time. So I really enjoyed talking to you. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's a beautiful book. Such a lovely, lovely book. Everybody go out and buy it. Thank you, Donal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cauvery Madhavan, and thank you, Donal. And absolutely, everybody go out and buy that book. It's fabulous. We've been getting so many comments about how exciting this conversation has been. So thank you both very much for being part of this particularly special series, which is being in collaboration with the European Union. And thank you all for watching. And as you know, we presented this session in partnership with the delegation of the European Union to India, the European Union Prize for Literature, Cultural Relations Platform, and Creative Europe. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll log back on at 8:30 p.m. for our JLF Brave New World Season 1 Redux, Present Tense from the Battlefront, Amrish Sathwik and Arunava Sinha in conversation. Even as the medical establishment battles the virus, there are rifts and contradictions within. Vascular surgeon and writer Amrish Sathwik speaks with literary translator Arunava Sinha about the terrors of the pandemic across the perspectives of history and literature, as well as in the present tense. See you at 8:30 p.m. Thank you both. That was fabulous.